We're going to start this discussion on the Quad and cybersecurity um, with an opening comment from all of us, and then one or two questions each, and then we'll open it up for the audience. So, if I can start with the opening comment, and I'll ask everybody to start with that. I think one big thing that we have seen over the discussions around the Quad has been the discussions around cybersecurity, discussions around defense, cyber defense. And what is, in all your considered opinion, the potential that cyber defense, cyber security partnership within the Quad have? And does it really translate into real action, operationalizing it, or is it going to remain a discussion topic over lunch? So if I can start with you, Martin, and then you, Lieutenant General Pan.
Thank you very much for the introductions. Great to be here with you all. I would say, just briefly, that for the Quad, cybersecurity and cyber defense will absolutely happen because it's essential. As the Quad integrates more closely across a range of issues, but particularly cooperation in critical and emerging technologies, it already is and will become a big target, particularly from cyber attacks from China, whether it's intellectual property theft, technology theft more broadly, and of course the target of disinformation campaigns. So I see this cooperation and collaboration happening because it will really determine how successful the Quad can be as a grouping. One final note that I would make is from the US standpoint, there's a lot of eagerness to coordinate more closely with the individual Quad member states and of course working together all four at the same time. The new national cybersecurity strategy was released on Wednesday. There's a lot of emphasis on international partnerships and there's specific mentions of cooperation with the Quad in that document. So from a US standpoint, I'm very optimistic that the Quad will have a very effective cybersecurity partnership. So.
Thank you, Martin. Lieutenant General Pant.
Thank you, Arvind, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Before I come to the Quad specifically, I just want to take a systems view of the global cyberspace as to how it looks from the top, and as they say these days, how does it look from a Chinese balloon? So, you see, the weaponization of technology and the weaponization of interdependence has created definitely a big fault line in the global cyberspace. Add to that the lack of attribution. It is so difficult to attribute cyber attacks. Add to that the lack of international laws, the mutual legal assistance treaties taking a very long time. Letters rogatory take a very long time. So the global cyberspace is very ripe for cyber attacks to take place and for cyber criminals to do their activities. The World Economic Forum has consistently said that cybercrime is the biggest man-made risk for the economic progress of nations. So what do nations do? The nations have to rely on groupings, on like-minded partner nations, because in cybersecurity, the threat intelligence has to come on a daily basis. There are 4 lakh malwares that are created every month. So to update your firewalls and other protected systems, there has to be international collaboration. This is where Quad comes in. And I think it's been a very successful exercise. As we go along, we'll talk about it. What happened in the 12th March summit. Initially, about 10 odd verticals were created, including vaccine development, including capacity building, etc. We have a joint working group on critical and emerging technologies, which my office also heads. We have a Quad SINA cyber group that was announced in the White House summit, where we have Ms. Ann Neuberger, Deputy NSA of the US. We have Mr. Michael Pezzulo, Home Secretary of Australia. We have Nakasone Okano-san from Japan, and I represent the nation in that. So lots has happened. Things have gone far ahead, and we'll talk about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Amy, if you could also add a little bit of a private sector lens to
Yes.
that. Yes.
I would love to add the private sector lens to this. So you asked if this could be more than a lunchtime conversation, and I certainly hope so. Nobody wants to have a lunchtime conversation about the Quad. We all want it to be, I think, successful. And the reason for that, I think, is the global economic consequences if it's not. And from the private sector perspective, I would say it's really important that we think creatively about how we can maintain data sovereignty without data localization. And the Quad plays a very important role in that. And I'll just end there so we have enough time for everyone else.
Yeah, thank you very much. My head is still dominated in the sweets in that places because I have the menus. You are eating this, so maybe I should not read because I want to eat more. And but at the same time, I need to talk about the cyber security. Indeed, my specialty is political science, not science. So that's why how to explain it is a little difficult. But at the same time, about the new technologies, because my subject is related to the defense strategy, I focusing on military revolution. What happened in the World War II? I should say that between the World War I to World War II, what happened is very important because when we talk about Germany, yes, the Nazis governed finally, but before it, they have already started one kind of effort to achieve the military revolution. Because under the Treaty of Versailles, Germany cannot possess the tanks, airplanes, submarines. Despite such kind of situation, two decades later, they occupied more than half of the Europe. So what happened? We need analysis. And if there is a military revolution, we should lead fast before the enemy take it. So that is very important. So about the cyber security, about other new technology, including quantum, in anything, we should read fast. So how to do that? That is important things. So Quad cooperation should read this. Before North Korea do it, China do it, Russia do it. In case of North Korea, very terrible. As a Japanese, I want to say, because there is no place we can destroy by using cyber attack, but they can attack us. So that is serious. So that is just one example of the cyber security. But we should take this technology first as a tactics, as a strategy. But that is my first comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. It won't surprise anyone to know that I also think this needs to evolve past a lunchtime conversation. But what I would actually say is it already has. So when you look at the level of cooperation that is happening between Australia, Japan, the US and India on things like norms and international law, I was previously Australia's chief cyber negotiator, and the cooperation between those four countries was absolutely integral to reaching an agreement that international humanitarian law applies to state conduct in cyberspace. Now, Russia is currently violating international law left, right, and center, so some would say, what's the point? But that is also an important, coming out of General Pant's comments about the importance of attribution. So I think one area that I would particularly like to see increasing cooperation among the Quad in a very practical way is around the issue of attribution. We've increasingly seen a number of countries coming out in coalitions attributing malicious cyber behavior. I think doing that in concert with the Quad would be a really practical next step. Two other areas that I'll highlight that I think are really ripe for further cooperation. One is CERT-to-CERT cooperation, so computer emergency response teams. This is a really practical, non-politicized way to respond to cyber incidents, and we really need to increase the technical cooperation among the certs of our four Quad nations. And the final thing I'll say is looking at ransomware cooperation. This is something that the foreign ministers indicated was an area of priority. There's the ransomware task force that has been established that is doing a lot of work in this space. So a few areas to highlight there.
Thank you, Joanna.
I know I'm gonna do it already.
Please.
So if I could just jump in, because I really want to agree about one thing that's very important from the private sector. You mentioned attribution. And I just want to take 1 second to talk about the difference between attribution at a deep technical level required for, say, legal pleadings or filings, such as you would have in the US, versus attribution for geopolitical reasons. And I want to emphasize from a private sector perspective, it's very helpful to us when we have nations that are able to do that geopolitical attribution so that we can harden our systems and we can advance positions in that way as well, doing things that we're not able to do ourselves. So I really appreciate your point on attribution.
That's an excellent point, because private sector can jump in if the nation states lead, and if there's a collective attribution, that helps a lot, because then there is not singular targeting also. So, can I start with you, Martin, on a first set of questions? And Lieutenant General Pant mentioned the Chinese balloon, the spy balloons that you've been seeing all over North America. While you have the right to be concerned about that, but how do you react to the fact that there is a spy in every pocket in most of the Quad countries, apart from India?
You're referring to TikTok, I assume?
I'm referring to a lot of technologies
Okay.
that's it in your phone. So,
Yeah. Well, yes, I would say that U.S. policymakers have been deficient in dealing with TikTok in particular, but has across the board taken...
I'd add Australia to that list.
Okay. But specifically for Huawei, of course, the United States has taken very significant actions there. The way TikTok is going, there's a lot of concern amongst U.S. policymakers. I think there's a lot of momentum building for a complete ban on the app in the United States. It's already banned on government phones at the federal level, and many states and local governments have followed suit. There's a bill in Congress that was just introduced a few days ago calling for a ban. So TikTok, not surprisingly, is on a charm offensive, trying to convince people that they can be trusted. I attended one of those sessions. I thought it was a disaster for the company. It was one of the worst public relations events that I've ever attended, in the fact that they obfuscated any reasonable question that people had about data privacy. They refused to acknowledge something that the company itself admitted to, that they were using the app to geolocate and spy on journalists that were reporting negative stories on the company. And this is just indicative more broadly of how these companies and ultimately the Chinese Communist Party is influencing, or at least attempting to influence, how people think, what information they see and don't see. And there's, of course, the potential for cyber attacks as well from a variety of platforms. So this is a huge problem for the United States. It's a huge problem for the Quad. And yeah, frankly, I think India should be commended for the very concrete action that they took over 2 years ago already.
thank you. Leading to from that, Lieutenant General Pant, what are the areas that we see a lot of cyber attacks? What are the domains that we see, not with specifics, but in general? And if you take some of those domains, what are those domains that within the Quad we can cooperate a lot more easier? Are the easy ones to cooperate and build resilience for the critical infrastructure? So both the questions I've kind of combined into one, so maybe you can take your time and answer that.
Let me start by highlighting the importance of Quad as a grouping. It covers 24% of the world's population, 35% of the global GDP, and most of the big tech companies are within the Quad, so it's an important grouping. Having said that, you mentioned resilience. Now, resilience is very important. Why it's important is because the three hard truths of cyberspace are: one, that the vulnerabilities in systems will continue as long as we depend on software and digitalization, etc. Second, if vulnerabilities exist, then attacks will continue to take place. And third, the attribution of these attacks will be as difficult as what it is today. So if this is the scenario that we are going to face in cyberspace, the answer lies in resilience. Resilience implies that you expect the attacks to take place. Now, how do you protect yourself? There are a number of ways and means. So what we've decided within the Quad, specifically since you asked, one is that we are working out, we've identified about 7 objectives. One of them is to establish baseline standards for cybersecurity. That is one. Second is to spread education and awareness. In fact, we have started a cyber security day that is going to be announced soon, where all 4 of our leaders are going to do a certain set of actions on a single day. In fact, there's already a cyber security challenge that is going on. You can go to code.org. You'll find the details of that challenge. Number of initiatives are taking place in India also. And around mid-April is the final test of this particular channel. Then we are establishing a framework for the supply chain resilience. Supply chain resilience, as I mentioned initially, has become very important because of that split that I mentioned. India has an advantage here, and I'm talking about both the IT aspects as well as the operational technology aspects. Why India has an advantage is because 2 years back, we initiated what is called as the National Security Directive on the telecom sector, which stipulates that any equipment connected to the telecom network of India has to be a trusted product from a trusted source. I am the designated authority for declaring as to what is a trusted product and what is a trusted source. And trusted source implies the company or the OEM, and we do a background check. We go to the grandfather of that company and see the ultimate beneficiary, whether it has links with the military or the intelligence of that nation. And not, when I say me, means about 10 odd agencies within the government carry out this check. And then we get this feedback, and then we say, okay, this is a trusted source. Then we go to the product. We see the equipment, and we go down to the level of the active programmable semiconductors. Where is the silicon coming from? Where are the chips coming from? What is the firmware involved? We go after the software also, the software modules. Where are they coming from? Because these days, even in open source, there are issues. You are aware of the MS Exchange case and the Log4j shell, etc. In fact, some agencies these days are putting software in open source with malware so that people start using it. So this is an area of concern, which is why the software bill of materials, etc., the issue has started. So in the resilience part, these are some of the actions that we are taking place, along with what was mentioned about the secure channel for certs. With the Americans, we already have automatic intelligence sharing system. We are now establishing it with the Australians. Japan will follow soon. Through cert-to-cert collaboration is taking place. And finally, of course, is the capacity building. Japan is leading in this. A number of exercises have already been held. So these are some of the issues that we are doing within the Quad to create resilience that you mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Lieutenant General Pant. Amy, if I can come to you, Lieutenant General Pant actually said the big tech, most of big tech, which is democratic in nature, comes from the Quad. The non-democratic big tech, the tech for surveillance, comes from China. What is the, how does the big tech view the G2G cooperation, and is it taking in, you said in your, in one of your interventions that the big tech looks at the leads coming from the Quad and the Quad public sector and government-to-government cooperation, but is that, are you also very proactive in addressing the developmental needs of the Quad, as a big tech company, as a private sector company, and what are some of the other signals, if I may say, that you need to start addressing the the non-US, the non-top of the pyramid market, especially in India?
So first, I'd like to say thank you for having me as the private sector. I think it's so important when we're talking about any government initiative in this space to recognize the idea that the infrastructure is privately held, and so to cut the private sector out of any of these conversations is to lose out on expertise and other things, and frankly, assistance in this space. And so thank you for having me here to talk about it. Regarding what the private sector can do, first, I think the private sector can work together in a meaningful way in order to support the Quad, and they can do that by joining the Cybersecurity Tech Accord, or supporting the standards in the Paris Peace Forum for Trust and Trust and Security. And so those are places where we can all come together in order to advance standards that are important for the Quad in general. Additionally, as private sector tech companies, there are meaningful ways that we already share information to the countries within the Quad. You mentioned the certs. We have a government security program signed with all of the countries of the Quad, where we share information about threats that are happening in your specific region from many data feeds throughout Microsoft. We also have a software security program that assures the security and allows the government to review the software code for security assurance purposes as well from some of those government security agreements. And so there's a clear and obvious place, I think, for the tech sector, not just Microsoft, to support the Quad's engagement.
Great, thank you. Dr. Nagao, I'll come back to you, but first question I have, because Amy talked about big tech and private sector, and there is also a debate globally now on, and I'm just going to bring this out, on the big tech regulation. And so how can, Professor, to you, how can, and you study tech policy, self-proclaimed international law nerd, right? Am I saying that correctly?
That's correct, yes.
I am putting in double quotes. I was very afraid to use that, but she said, please feel free to use it. So as somebody who is a self-proclaimed international law nerd, what do you see as, while policies will be very local, and every nation will make their own things, but we can always cooperate, do a lot of harmonization. Crypto industry is one where we need to harmonize because it's really borderless there. So similarly, there's implications of, Amy talked about data sovereignty versus data localization, for example, and India is bringing out a bill which talks about data embassies with trusted partners. In that respect, how do you see us converging with certain common principles for big tech regulation or governance, even if not regulation?
I think this is one of the most important issues for the Quad Critical Tech Working Group to be looking at and focusing on. We absolutely need to be regulating big tech. We have not paid enough attention to this in the past, and we absolutely need to make sure that we are lifting the standards and holding them to account. But my concern with a lot of the public debate around the regulation of big tech is we're also not recognizing that big tech, we need them. If we are going to compete with China, it is big tech that is going to bring a lot of the research and design to that conversation. So I think my fear with the current swing towards the regulation of big tech, we absolutely need to correct the fact that we haven't regulated enough. But we also need to be making sure that as we are engaging, that we're achieving the objectives, which also has a very strategic competitive purpose. So when it comes to regulation at a national level, there is an immense amount of regulation in this space. My team has just developed a tech policy atlas. This covers 36 different jurisdictions. It covers everything from cybersecurity to digital economy to AI. In the 36 jurisdictions, there's over 2,000 different pieces of legislation and regulation. And harmonization of that needs to be the end goal. But we also need to respect the sovereignty and the different perspectives that different nations bring. And this is something that I have had a lot of experience with in my previous life, where people would say to me, how did you convince X country to give up Y in a particular negotiation, for example? And the idea that you can somehow trick or convince a country to do something in the regulatory or the legal space is a total fallacy. What we need to be doing is working and listening to each other, and frankly, there's not enough of listening to each other, to the genuine concerns that countries have around these regulatory issues, and find the areas of commonality. So on something like data localization and data sovereignty, which is an extremely sensitive issue, particularly among Quad countries, right? We have very, very different views and perspectives, but there are some things that we all stand for. One is data privacy as a starting point. We also support lawful access for law enforcement, for example. And so I think there is, it's about finding those areas of commonality and focusing on those areas among the Quad countries. And if we can do it among the Quad, then the ability then to extrapolate that out in larger regional groupings is quite significant.
Thank you very much.
Just very quick before. As the only private sector representative here, I just want to say for all of us, yay harmonization, right? So please, as you think about these things as the Quad, harmonization is the most important thing that you can consider.
And that's a very welcome thing coming from the private sector also, so thank you. Dr. Nagao, to you. Can you comment on how this Quad cooperation can, especially technical cooperation, can be more in cyber technology rather than just only on the military aspect? So how can we do more quantum technology cooperation, emerging technology cooperation, and build more capacity? Because as Lieutenant General Rajesh Pant said, Japan is really contributing to the capacity side. So what else can we do? How can we work more on this?
Yes, Japan is maybe famous as a technological country. We're proud of. That's true. But at the same time, maybe in case of Japan, there are plenty of the problems because this is a strategic cooperation, including military. And if Japan tries to apply this technological advantage to the military advantage, because of the long tradition of Japan's pacifism, the academics strongly refuse to cooperate with the Ministry of Defense of their country. So, because this is bad thing, for a long time, Japan has educated their academics. So that's why the Ministry of Defense and other academics completely is maybe lying. So we cannot cooperate each other. That's why last December 2022, Japan published a national security strategy that pointed that we should cooperate. And so when we talk about Quad cooperation, about new technology, for example, the quantum computer you said, quantum computer, in my perception, I'm not an expert of the technology, but quantum computer is a very, 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 very fast computer. So this means that if we use this computer, we can develop a new weapon very easily because more complex mathematical formula that they can solve. So that's why this technology is very effective and we should cooperate in the Quad. But in case of Japan, these academics do not want to cooperate because this is dual-use technology originally came from civil sector. So this means that the civil sector means that they think these academics and the pacifists take charge of this technology. So when the Japanese government or Ministry of Defense asks them to cooperate, they refuse it. So that is a very big problem in case of the cooperation, international cooperation. And in case of the Quad is all of the 4 countries, the sovereign country, and just US provides other 3 technology. This is not a deal. So independent countries should deal. One side gives the technology, other side gives the technology. But in case of Japan, despite Japan has many cards, we cannot use it because they refuse to cooperate. That is a very big situation we need to overcome. So one by one, we try to persuade now. This is one kind of civil war is happening inside Japan now, and we are fighting inside.
Civil quantum war.
Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
Can I pick up on the quantum point? Because I think it's a really important one, and I also see Vikram, one of Australia's leading quantum scientists, standing at the back, so it would be remiss of me not to make this point. I think when we talk about quantum, first of all, we need to define what we're talking about. Are we talking about quantum, post-quantum encryption? Are we talking about quantum computing, quantum sensors, etc.? But I really think we focus far too much on quantum computing and not enough on post-quantum encryption.
Yes.
Now, if you look at ASPI's critical tech tracking, quantum computing is one of the only areas where the US is leading on China, but China is focusing on post-quantum encryption. If whoever wins the quantum race, that will be an advantage that is held for a short period of time as that research comes out and the rest of us pick up those wins. In that interim period, everything that has currently been encrypted will be able to be decrypted using these quantum computers. We have the ability today, and particularly through companies like Quintessence Labs that Vikram leads, to make encryption quantum resilient. We are not focusing enough on that, whilst all of this data which may be currently encrypted is being hoovered up. And it really doesn't matter who eventually wins that quantum race. We really need to be focusing on protecting now and making quantum resilient our crown jewels. And so I think this is also an area of focus for Quad.
Thank you, Professor. And I think that is a good segue into what I intended to ask as last questions to everybody. So, Martin, that was a question to you on can the US, the Quad really, on one aspect, there is certain areas in the US and the Quad, which together we are ahead of China, but there's certain areas like more research being done on AI, encryption, quantum, post-quantum encryption, that threatens Quad from even being prepared for it. So how do we cooperate more from a research perspective? I think Japan, we have already seen an internal civil war on the research perspective. Other countries can cooperate and work on this area jointly because it's a big problem to solve.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Xi Jinping has come out and said that he wants China to be the world leader in artificial intelligence by 2030. China is in a very good position to attain that goal, and that's why it's so critically important that the Quad cooperate on these issues. Some specific areas that I think would be very useful is just joint R&D efforts on more efficient algorithms, for example, algorithms that aren't as compute intensive, meaning also they don't use as much energy to train the large language models. There's the issue of transparency in AI. There's a lot that the Quad can do together to set the standards for what that looks like. Setting those standards is critically important because that then sets the tone for how the rest of the world thinks about transparency in AI. Finally is the norms for the use of AI-enabled systems. This is something where if China has the upper hand in setting global norms for the use of AI, that's most likely not going to be aligned with the values and the governance systems of the four Quad countries. On quantum, I couldn't agree more with Joanne on the need for post-quantum encryption. So this is something that the United States is doing a fair amount of work in at the National Security Agency, the National Institute of Science and Technology. I think we should use that as a foundation for better cooperation amongst the four countries. And as a greenfield technology, meaning that we're all going for that same goal, and it's not clear what technology pathway is going to end up being the best to achieve quantum computing, quantum sensing, that at least is theoretically possible now. That lends itself very well to multilateral collaboration because no one knows what the right answer is, but the Quad countries together have a much better chance of reaching that goal before a country like China does.
Thank you. Lieutenant General Pant, a more of a narrative question to you. We're discussing a lot of things about the Quad. How does Quad really message its cyber cooperation without having more military overtones or threatening overtones?
You heard the Minister of External Affairs saying that Quad is not a military alliance. It is basically for the Indo-Pacific, having a rule-based order, safe, secure, etc. So, and if you recall what I said earlier about those 10 verticals that we decided on the 12th March summit, there's nothing military about it. And they're very clear work groups are established, and they're working on very finite timelines. So I think nobody expected actually the Quad to become so successful. That is what I feel today, and having worked on it for the last 2 years at least, that in all fields, and I can tell you in the Quad Cyber group, which I represent the nation, we had hosted the counterpart principals on 31st of January this year in New Delhi itself, and we made them go through a discussion exercise on a supply chain risk management. We actually conducted an exercise and asked each one of them as to what are your best practices in case of, how do you trustworthiness of vendors and the supply chain risks, etc. And a lot of common aspects came out. So in cyber, I can assure you, when we discuss with partner nations, we find all of us have the same problems. And that is where our common experiences and solutions help a lot, and we can share each other's best practices. So I don't think there's anything military about this, except for the Malabar exercise that all four are conducting now. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. And that's important from a messaging perspective also. So, Amy, last comments around, Martin talked about it, Professor talked about it. How can we now also look at the private sector working towards these AI goals and also keep it, have harmonized policies, free from biases, be more transparent? What can be done to ensure that?
Yeah, so first, we, Microsoft, and other technology companies in the US are heavily invested in the success from a technological perspective of AI. But I think the primary difference between us and China is we're not just heavily invested in the technological success, but the societal success and the impact that these AI technologies can have. At Microsoft, we started back in 2017 with an Office of Responsible AI that's been looking at privacy, cybersecurity, and content and analytics related issues in this space because it's so incredibly important. I know there's doubt. I heard Sod on this panel about us winning the race in AI. I certainly hope we do, because I believe that the responsible use of it by the United States and throughout the Quad will really set the tone for the technology itself in the future.
Yeah, and that's, I think, where I always say that we will definitely win the responsible AI war. The irresponsible AI we have to control. And we know where it'll emanate from and who will originate that from. So, with that, I'm closing the second round of questions and answers and responses from the panel and opening it up for the audience to ask, make comments. Please identify yourself. If it's a question, please address to a particular panelist, and I reserve the right to not answer that question, get a panelist to answer that question. That's a disclaimer. So, yes, please. First question for you, ma'am. Can we have a mic here, please?
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Christina van Bergen. I'm a professor specialized in cybersecurity in Europe. And of course, this is a conference about Quad and about cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, quantum. I think that it's so important, especially in this kind of cybersecurity area, to work on international partnerships. And you might know, because you are experts in cybersecurity, that Europe has a very important legislation in the area of cybersecurity. It improved, it updated its legislation. We have now a directive on network information security, or we have an EU Cyber Resilience Act. So in this area, we cannot work local. We need to work through international partnership. And I fully agree with Amy that we need to create this kind of strong partnership between public and private sector. We also need to get the best practices. We have now in Europe trade and technology councils, and 2 weeks ago I was in Tokyo discussing with the Office of the Prime Minister about cybersecurity and the way in which we can be involved. Europe, we can have a Quad plus Europe, because in cybersecurity we need to start harmonization from very beginning and coordination. If we do not have coordination, we are all damned to fail. So I mean, we need to start with this perspective of having an efficient international coordination. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment, Professor. Yes, we can have a question over here.
Thank you. My name is Bani Grewal. I'm from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. My question is for Lieutenant General Pant. You spoke about the Quad joint working groups and their collaboration in cyber and critical technologies. And the Quad has also released its principles of technology design. They're working on standards, looking at semiconductor supply chains. I was wondering if you could comment a bit about how the Quad is working to make progress in these areas, and specifically in the technology principles and the design, the value chains, how the Quad countries are working together to actually towards practical cooperation rather than just releasing principles.
Captain General Pant, yes.
Yeah, thank you, Bani. In the Quad Joint Working Group on Critical and Emerging Technologies, we've identified 3 areas, quantum, AI, and biotech. In biotech, specifically synthetic biology. In each of these areas, we started off with mapping, and it was a very interesting exercise that even the partner nations, I remember in Japan, the representative himself was surprised that so many people were working on quantum and AI and various aspects. So we've mapped out what is happening in each country, and then we're trying to take this forward as to what are the commonalities to ensure that there's no overlap. So that is the direction we are taking, specifically on the CET working group. On the QSCG, that is the Quad Senior Cyber Group, I have mentioned to you that we've laid out those 7 objectives and principles, and we're working on the the best practices, the supply chain, etc. That is the direction we're taking.
Thank you. Thank you. There was a question somewhere on that table, please.
Thank you. So my name is Mihoko Matsubara from NTT Corporation. It's a telecom company based in Japan. So I'd like to comment the Japanese willingness to contribute to the global collaborations on quantum computing and quantum encryption. Because Japan has been already working with global universities and also companies to make sure that the data is protected in a proper manner by quantum cryptography. For example, NTT, my company, has worked with American universities to create a new post-quantum cryptographies to submit it to NIST competitions, and we went into the final round. And also Toshiba, Japanese company, but global companies, has been working with US financial institutions to come up with another post-quantum cryptography. And I introduced the ION Global Forum, Innovative Optical and Wireless Network, and it invites universities and also companies from different countries around the globe. And also one of the important pillars that the ION Global Forum has been working on is quantum. Because quantum computing needs to create the efficiency, as Dr. Nagao said, to process a lot of data. But you also have to provide good data protection. So that's why you need a post-quantum cryptography. So that's why I really want to emphasize that Japan is really willing and has been willing and keen to invest and collaborate with the international partners.
Thank you. Yes, Professor Nagao.
And she is most important cybersecurity expert in Japan, Matsubara-san.
Thank you.
So she is now the speaker of that bigger room, that's why she cannot come here. So that's why she is a proper person, indeed. But at the same time, because I explained...
Let me just say on a lighter side, sorry.
Yeah.
I think we have achieved our purpose that we have involved everybody in the group. So thank you. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Only one thing I need to say. I pointed at many problems in Japan, the civil war, something like that. But we will win and the pacifists will go on. So Japan will contribute to Quad. That's why I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you. And we already have cooperation coming from here. So thank you. Last 2 questions / comments. One from the back, please.
My name is Kanesh Gaur. I'm founder of India Future Foundation, and I do work in cybersecurity. One of the key challenges that I find today is tackling ransomware, and that is hurting most of the Quad members today, where the competence is there in some of the countries. Others are, far behind. And we know most of the threats where they are originating from. Recently, I was tracking some of the APT groups, which were targeting Australian power companies. Given this is a big issue and it's impacting national safety, security, and increasing every time, what could be done to tackle ransomware and APTs? My question is first to Johanna Weaver, and if rest of the panelists would want to share their views, that'd be very nice.
Professor,
Thank you.
Please.
Sure. And just to clarify my earlier comment, we will win the race, Amy. I have no doubt about that. But I think that it's very interesting to look at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute's Critical Technology Tracker, which is looking at, from a very data-heavy perspective, who is currently winning. And that doesn't mean they will win. I'm quite confident that we will. So to go to the question of ransomware, I think this is a really important point. Very quickly, there are a number of things that I think we can do. One around is standardizing reporting requirements so that if you are reporting ransomware in India, you have the same reporting requirements as in the US and Japan. And that goes to General Pant's point about the automation of the sharing of threat information among certs, which should be happening and isn't, and that needs to be rectified as a priority. I think other areas that we can really be cooperating on also is just increasing basic levels of cybersecurity. We've been saying this for years. Tangible ways we might be looking at this is how do we have board reporting requirements, these types of things, to actually place the emphasis on those who have the who are, to use the US cybersecurity strategy that's just been released, to shift the burden to those who can most afford to pay it. I think there's a number of other things we can do, and actually we're doing a project with Microsoft on this very thing. So watch my team's work, and we'll be putting out some more recommendations.
Lieutenant General Pant, please.
Thank you, Kanishk. Last year, October, we launched the Counter Ransomware Initiative of 37 nations took part in that. And that's for Professor Christina also. EU was a member of that. And then this culminated in a conference in DC. And now we've created an international counter ransomware task force. It is being led by Australia at the moment, and it has various verticals of information sharing and resilience, etc. And we are going after disruption. We are going after these guys because they are human beings. They also have a mobile phone and they have children. They go to school, so they can be tracked. Recently, you may have heard of 7 names that came out against whom sanctions have been employed. You may have also heard of the Hive group case. We were sitting inside the Hive group for 3 months. And whenever they went in for a ransomware attack, we took out the decryption keys and gave it to the companies. And $150 million was saved. And after 3 months, of course, we brought them down. So international cooperation is a must. A lot is happening on the counter ransomware aspect.
And that's a very big success already. So congrats to everybody on that. With that, I had promised the panelists that the dessert will be waiting for them after, and the professors would judge whether they have earned their dessert. But I think a round of applause will do for the panelists.